Good morning. I'm impressed how everybody was here actually prior to 7 o'clock, so I still see many of you still have your Army tendencies with you, so that's very good. It's great to see so many people here. These are important times, and I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to speak today. I also wanted to thank General Sullivan for putting my whole staff at one table, so I was easy to be able to reach over there and task them while we were sitting at the table. I don't normally get them all together very much, so thanks for that. I appreciate that very much. It's always great to be here and have an opportunity to talk to an audience like this, a diverse audience, but an audience that cares about the future of our national security and specifically the future of our Army. So I want to thank all of you for being here. What I would say is I just got back, as General Sullivan mentioned, over the last 30 to 45 days, I spent a little time in Iraq, a little time in Afghanistan. I just got back last weekend from Israel and Jordan. And they are incredibly tense, busy places. And I think one of the things, as I think through where we are and where we are headed, is I always go back to when we started this journey of defense cuts and peace dividends in 2011 and 12. The thought process was that we're coming out of Iraq, we're coming out of Afghanistan, the world is going to require significantly less military intervention, and frankly, it's not happened. And I think that's the concern. I think the type of intervention that we'll do will be different. I don't see us putting 150,000 or 200,000 soldiers on a border and attacking into a country, but I do think we still need the capability to deter. What I do believe is we're going to do what we're doing today, is conduct many operations simultaneously around the world. So let's take a look at what's going on today. The threat of terrorism is not going away. We should know that. It's in our face every single day, whether it's in Paris, whether it's the continued operation going on in Yemen, where we now have a group occupying the presidential palace, a friend of the United States, who is helping us to fight the war on terror in Yemen. We have ISIL that's occupying Iraq and Syria, attempting to establish a caliphate. So terrorism is not going away. And it's going to be with us throughout our lifetime, and probably throughout our children's lifetime. And so we have to figure out how we're going to deal with this threat. We have to understand that it's going to be there. We have to face it face on. We have to challenge it face on. And we have to figure out, what does that mean to us? So as an Army, what does that mean? Well, what it means to us is that we have to understand the enemy. We have to understand their intent. We have to now develop concepts that enable us to respond across a variety of different responses, whether it be building partner capacity, whether it be deploying forces to conduct operations, whether it be reassuring allies. We have to have the capability to do this across the broad spectrum of conflict. But the other thing which has occurred over the last 12 to 15 years is the investment in our partner and allies' defense has gone down significantly. If you look at the capability of some of our and many of our NATO partners, their investments have been much less than they were in the future. Their capabilities are less. Their armies are smaller. Their investment in modernization is less. We're starting to see that a little bit in the Pacific as well, as we look at some of the issues we have in the Pacific. If you go around to every continent, you will find that the dependence on the United States and the dependence on our leadership is growing, not going down. So we face that dilemma. I've said it many times, I believe that this is the most uncertain time that I've seen in our national security since I've been in the uniform. I'm not necessarily saying the most dangerous, but I'm saying the most uncertain. And uncertainty is problematic because you have to be able to, you don't know what you're going to respond to. When I was a young officer, when I was a lieutenant, captain, major, assigned to Europe each one of those times, as we were fighting the Cold War, although we had an enemy that was incredibly capable, the Soviet Union, we knew who they were. We knew what they were going to do. We knew what capabilities they had. So we developed an operational concept and a strategy that enabled us to go after that threat. Today, we don't have that luxury. I can't tell you if we're going to fight on the Korean Peninsula. I can't tell you if we're going to be in Iraq and Syria fighting war. I can't tell you we're going to have to be in Eastern Europe deterring Russia. I don't know. So what that means, we have to be prepared to do a variety of things simultaneously. And that's the challenge we have. So let's now walk forward to what we do here in Washington, which is try to create capability and develop budgets that support our security strategy, and in my mind, support our soldiers so they have the right tools to do the job that we might ask them to do in the future. And that's my concern. I usually talk about it as an insurance policy. You know, the military and our national security capabilities like an insurance policy. And of course, all of us sitting here know what it's like when you're hunting for insurance. You're looking for the cheapest deal possible until you have to actually use it. Then you want the best policy. But you say, why did I get that $2,000 deductible? Why didn't I buy more life insurance? That's what we're talking about here. Are we willing to invest in the future of our security? Because when we need it, you can't start investing then. There's not enough time in order to invest properly. To sustain the readiness that we need to respond to the variety of threats that we face, we need to invest today, we need to invest tomorrow, we need to invest the year after that, because you're investing in human capital. You're investing in the men and women and their ability to train and respond around the world. You are investing in the equipment that they need to be successful. And if we don't have the consistent funding to do that, what will happen is we won't properly invest in our people. We won't properly invest in our equipment. And then when we have to use them, they will not be at the level we expect them to be and the American people expect them to be. That's the challenge we have. In 2013, 10% of the Army was ready. The end of 2014 and today, we're about 33% ready. Through 2015, we'll probably sustain that, maybe move up a little bit to maybe 40% at the highest. Prior to 2001, routinely, the Army was about 70 to 75% ready. We had built up capability that was there to be used if necessary. But in 2016, we faced sequestration again. If sequestration occurs for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, we're moving towards a hollow army. What does a hollow army mean? My definition of a hollow army is one that we don't properly train our soldiers. They aren't able to do the exercises that they need. They're not able to have the ammunition necessary. They don't have the equipment they need. They're not able to sustain their equipment to the levels that are necessary for them to respond no notice to an unknown threat in potentially 5 different places around the world. We're also not investing in our modernization programs the way we'd like. Almost a 50% reduction in our modernization accounts. That will be worse if we go into sequestration. So now we're not investing in training, we're not investing in our equipment, and this falls on the shoulders of our soldiers. And that's the point I try to make to everybody. The ones who will pay the price are the men and women in this uniform, because they will go no matter what. It's up to us to make sure they have what they need. Enough of that. But the last thing I would close on is, on this subject, is today we have about 45,000 soldiers deployed. Most people don't understand that or realize that. We are not standing still, 45,000. Another 80,000 deployed in about 150 countries around the world. So we're busy. And oh, by the way, we're doing the best we can to rebuild our combined arms capability. So we're very, very busy. Our soldiers are doing great. Our leaders are doing terrifically. But we owe it to them to get them the resources necessary for them to do their job. Let me just touch on one other thing here, and I think it's very important. As we move forward and the complexity of the world, I think many of you have heard me talk about this before. The number one thing we have to invest in is our leaders, our officers and our non-commissioned officer corps. Because what we're going to ask them to do is much more difficult than what we had to do as young officers and young non-commissioned officers, because of the complexity of what we face around the world. I was just over Israel, and they walked me through their operation that they conducted in Gaza in late August, September. And one of the lessons they learned was how decentralized operations was worse for them, and the fact that they had to have trained platoons, companies, and battalions. And that they had to have leaders that were able to be adaptable, make decisions, understand what they were doing, and be able to operate in a chaotic environment and make sound decisions. That's what we're going to ask of our leaders of the future. So we have to invest in them. And we're in the process of investing in changing what we do throughout our institution. We're changing NCOES. We're changing how we're training our officers. We're adjusting, adapting, and it's not just a change today it's going to be constant change and adaptation. So we start to develop young men and women who can thrive in an environment that is complex and difficult. That's our advantage. That's very important. But the other key here is the importance of innovation. In my mind, that's a key tenet of the new Army operating concept that we have developed. What do we do and how do we drive innovation? How do we develop the new tools, the new operational concepts? How do we develop, then match that with the technologies that are already available or that the technologies that can be developed in the future? In order to operate in this complex environment we're going to operate in, how do we maximize our soldiers? The Army is about maximizing soldiers and organizations. How do we use innovation to maximize the capability of our soldiers and the organizations in which they serve? We got to change the bureaucratic processes here in Washington. But we also got to reach out to industry. We got to reach out to higher education institutions and talking about how we can innovate together. How do we make sound investments? How do we put new capabilities into the force faster? We're too slow. The world is moving too fast, and we have to keep up with it. So we have to change how we're doing this. We got to keep ahead of our determined enemies. It is much easier to be an adversary of the United States because everything we do is on the internet. All the technologies that we have are readily available to anybody who wants them. All you got to do is look a little bit. So the playing field is being leveled. It is being leveled because of the movement of information and access to information. And it's important that we get quicker, that we get more adaptive. In my opinion, in the future, it's not about how much technology and information you have, it's about how you use that technology. It's how we have to be better at using the technology than anybody else. I was in Israel, and I was at their National Training Center, and I was talking to the deputy commander of their training center, and he made a comment to me that I thought was interesting. And he was talking about his forces, but I think it applies to us as well. He goes, in the past, Israel was used to being the David versus the Goliath. And when they were David, what they did is they spent a lot of time thinking about how they could outsmart their enemies. How could they be innovative? Because they did not have the resources necessary that could keep up with the Goliaths. But now that they've invested more, they have now sort of in the Middle East become the Goliath. And the problem is they're no longer thinking like David. They're thinking like Goliaths. That's what we have to do. We have to think like David. We have to think like David. Because in the world that we're in, we have to be adaptive and innovative in everything that we do. We have to be ahead of them in using the technologies that are available because everybody now has access to them. So that's the key tenet of what we're going to try to do. We have a campaign of learning that we're going to do. We're going to continue to do. We're going to do Army warfighting assessments at Fort Bliss. The first one will happen in about 18 months from now. We're going to do an exercise out there that's going to do an assessment of concepts. We have about 15 international partners signed up. And we're going to start building new concepts that will enable us to be ahead of our adversaries in these complex environments. And we'll use it to validate force design, training, complex systems integration. And we will also use it to validate technology and how it fits into where we want to go in the future. We've identified 20 warfighting challenges. And there's nothing in those 20, when you first read the 20 warfighting challenges, there's nothing in there that says, oh my God, that's unbelievable. I never thought about that before. But the issue is we have to understand these concepts is what's going to drive our capability in the future. How do we integrate? Let me give you an example. Conduct space and cyber operations is one of the 20 warfighting challenges. So for us, what's the challenge? How do we integrate offensive cyber operations into our tactical formations? We got to solve that problem. We got to figure out how we're going to do that. How do we increase reliability of our systems? How do we reduce our energy? How do we reduce our dependence on energy? So we can get there faster, quicker. How do we improve soldier, leader, team? How do we maximize and optimize soldier performance? We should be the experts in the world in optimizing individual performance, because that's what we do. We want to bring people in from all walks of life, and we want to use them and develop them and train them and teach them and optimize their ability to operate in complex environments. How do we do that? How do we conduct early entry operations? How do we do that with small packages? How do we do that with complete situational awareness? We have to understand how we do that. What does combined arms operations look like in the future? Some of it will look like it does today. But how do we integrate different concepts? Manned, unmanned capabilities, cyber, information operations. How do we increase mobility and lethality? How do we do it with smaller footprints? Those are the challenges that we have to address. Those are the kind of things I think are very important for us. So although I can sit up here and talk about, I'm worried about, woe is us, I'm worried about sequestration. Here's the bottom line, is I am worried about it. I don't like it. I'd ask to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. But no matter what happens in the future, we got to drive forward and start thinking about the future and what our Army is going to look like, and we got to drive there now. Because this is about making sure our soldiers have what they need to do the missions we ask them to do. It's up to us in this room to work together, be transparent, and make sure we're doing everything possible to make sure we continue to have the best Army in the world. Because the one thing I do know, as I continue to go around, is we have the best young men and women in the world working for us, who have faith in us, who trust us to give them the tools necessary for them to do their job. So what you're going to be seeing over the next 6 months is us continuing to drive this new Army operating concept, this new dealing with these 20 warfighting challenges that we have. Having systems in place to speed up our ability to acquire new systems, to develop new operational and tactical concepts, and integrate them quickly into our formations. To me, it's an exciting time in the Army because it's a time of great change. And we need the right leaders and the right capability, and we need everybody working together to help us as we move forward with this dramatic change. I will just say, as I've had a chance to travel around and I watched what we're doing in all of these different parts of the world, whether it be, which was interesting, by the way, I think it was in Latvia, Lithuania, I can't remember. They have the Person of the Year in this country. The Person of the Year was the American soldier in Lithuania. I think it was Lithuania. They have like a Time magazine thing. The picture was an American soldier. Because they were there when they needed them. They reassured them in a time of need. When I go to Iraq and I talk to the Iraqi leaders, or I talk to the Kurdish leaders, they talk about the incredible support that they're getting from the United States Army's officers, non-commissioned officers mainly, that are there helping them to develop capability. When I go to Jordan, I was telling General Sullivan, I went to visit our soldiers, but the king asked to see me, so I went to see the king. And he was talking about our soldiers and the work that they're doing and how important that is. Our soldiers all around the world doing what we ask them to do every single day. It's up to us to make sure we give them the tools necessary to be successful and come back to their families. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk, and I guess I'll take some questions if anybody has any questions. I went a little long, but I apologize.
Okay, anyone?
Ellen Mitchell, Inside the Army. The Pentagon's air-sea battle concept, it recently became the joint concept for access and maneuver in the global commons, and you've spoken critically about this in the past, so I was wondering, it seems the concept is evolving in new ways, so what are your expectations of the Army's role in JAM-GC? And you spoke a lot about innovation, so what are kind of these innovations the Army can offer?
So the first thing is that I have not talked critically about it. I want to make that very clear. What I've said in the past is I absolutely agree with the concepts of what they're developing and now the new joint concept in air-sea battle. And what I always said to everybody, the reason they do this is to gain access to areas around the world. And the reason they want to gain access is to put soldiers on the ground. So it is inherently a joint concept. And I talked about the early entry operations. And in first week of August out at the National Training Center, we are going to do a joint early entry operation, which includes special operations forces, conventional forces, air forces, naval forces, in order to develop the concept that is necessary to ensure we can get our ground forces on the ground anywhere in the world. And that's part of this concept. And so in my mind, there's many innovative ways for us to ensure that we insert and can project combat power around the world in a variety of sizes and shapes. And I always remind everybody, and people have heard me say this before, is I remind everybody that 100% of the people live on land. And we have to be able to conduct operations on land, and that's what we do. And so as we develop these new concepts, we're an integral part of them. And I feel very comfortable with that.
Hi, General. Thanks for joining us this morning. Jen Judson with Politico. I wanted to ask you about the threat from ISIL in terms of these big training missions. We were looking at training moderate Syrian rebels, Iraqis, and other countries. And so I'm wondering if you're worried about insider threats, like we've seen in Afghanistan, and how to defend against that it sounds like, especially in Syria, that could be a security nightmare, so.
Well, I think first off, we always worry about insider threats because that's part of the tactics that are used by these extremist elements. I will say, though, in the training in Syria, we're not training actually in Syria. We're training in 4 other countries around, and so that's part of the mitigation strategy. So we will train outside of Syria and then have those forces go into Syria. We obviously are training forces in Iraq. We obviously are always concerned about insider threat. We dedicate a significant amount of resources to intelligence collection, and we train our individuals that are in there to understand the threats that are there and how you respond to those. And we've been doing that for quite some time. So I feel pretty comfortable with our ability to understand that threat. But your comment is a good one. It is always a threat, and we have to be very careful as we take a look at it.
General Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. Yet another reporter as opposed to a real person.
Impromptu press conference.
We do swarm. Sir, you talked about 2 things. On the one hand, a lot of resource constraint, and on the other hand, a lot of new ideas. Now, this wouldn't be the first time the Army's come up with a lot of new ideas and done important work under resource constraint. We have the 1930s. We have the 70s and air-land battle, the beginnings of the Big Five. We have arguably Gordon Sullivan in the 1990s. But it hardly makes it easier. So, if sequestration hits in full or in part, how do you sustain the innovation, sustain the working on the future as predecessors have, and what is the damage that's done, no matter how hard you think, if you don't have enough resources?
Well, the bottom line is you have no choice. Is, in fact, reduction of resources actually has to, because of the reduction of resources, you have to increase the rate of innovation. And so it's a chicken and egg argument, but the bottom line is you got to do both. And so what you have to do is you have to balance your ability to innovate, you have to balance your ability to develop new concepts with the fact that you have to sustain a level of readiness in order to respond. And you cannot eat one or the other, you got to do both. And so what will happen is we're going to have to develop a budget that allows us to do both. So what does that mean? That means we're going to get a lot smaller. So what that means is your ability to deter is a little bit less. Your risk increases because you only have the capability to do certain things, not everything. Where are we going to take risk? So those are the kind of things you're going to have to do. But we cannot walk away from this. We have to move forward. Because if we don't, we'll find ourselves left behind. And we cannot do that. The world is changing too quickly. And we have to change with it. I am confident that we can do both, but there's risks. So what you do is your risk increase. My job is all about mitigating risk. That's what you do as a military leader. You try to mitigate risk. So what happens with sequestration is the risk increases significantly. Our ability to conduct missions, unknown missions around the world, the ability to do that decreases, so the risk to instability increases. But we cannot stop innovating. In fact, at the time of decreased resources requires us to do the innovation.
Hi, Chief. Ray Dubois, CSIS. Our Army's being asked more and more to build partnership capacity around the world. You spoke of the training missions. I read this morning that Lieutenant General Ben Hodges was in Kiev yesterday and announced a training mission. Our Army would be training 4 companies of Ukraine National Guardsmen. Can you give us some insights into that training mission?
No. It's like everything else. We are working with them to develop small unit capability. And so it's things that we do all the time. We will do squad, platoon, company training with them to help them build capabilities. We'll do some leader development training, NCO development training, those kind of things that we continue to do to help them rebuild some capability in their Army. And that's the intent.
Thank you, General. John Harper with Stars and Stripes. I think I'll jump on this press bandwagon. President Obama has authorized up to 3,100 troops to go to Iraq for the Train, Advise, and Assist and Force Protection mission. And I was wondering if you think that that will be enough, or if additional troops will need to be sent over time. Thanks.
Well, I think it's constant assessment. So, we started with 1,500, and as we did that, we realized that was not enough. So we increased it to 3,100, so we can increase the velocity of training and development of the Iraqi security forces. So I think what we do is we ask our commanders forward to constantly assess that, and they will. And if they think they need to increase the amount of people in order to increase the velocity based on actions on the ground, then we will consider that. And then the Joint Chiefs will make a recommendation to the President. And we do that all the time, and we will continue to do that. Anybody else?
Thank you very much, General. Let's have a hand for the Chief of Staff.
Okay.